So, our next session is entitled, Is Your Water Good for Spraying? Dr. Tom Wolfe. Tom Wolfe is a spray application specialist based in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. That's where I was born. He grew up on a farm in Manitoba and studied agriculture at the University of Manitoba and the Ohio State University. Tom has over 36 years research experience in spray technology, including work on spray drift, coverage, efficacy, and spray cleanout. With Jason DeVoe, Tom hosts and writes for the world's #1 sprayer website, sprayers101.com. He is a past president and fellow of the Canadian Weed Science Society and has been named Distinguished Agrologist with Saskatchewan Institute of Agrology. Welcome, Dr. Wolfe.
Thank you so much, Lori. Great to be here at Manitoba Ag Days once again. And it's a bit of a throwback for me because one of the first times I ever spoke to an audience was at the Manitoba Ag Days, and my dad was in the audience, and he gave me some pointers on how to do a better talk next time. And wouldn't you have it, he's here today. So we're both 30 or so years older, but the relationship still exists, so that's wonderful. I'm looking forward to hearing about it later. We'll see how kind he is. He's a kind man. Can you see, is it okay if where should I stand? Can you all see the screen? Is this good? Can I get are you good? Are we good? I know you're good. All right. I want to first of all acknowledge my co-author, Jim Reese. Jim Reese was with Precision Laboratories. Some of the information that I have in here is from him, which I really appreciate. It's just he presented it in such a great way. I thought, Jim, can I share this with my audience as well? All right, so last summer I drove to Alberta to participate in a field day, and on my way down Highway 3 I was coming towards Taber. I knew I was in the irrigation district, Bow Island, that area, and I saw a tender trailer fill up on the side of the highway. So I pulled in and I said, do you mind if I have a quick word with you about what you're doing? Just want to get some numbers. I believe he had about a 6,000 gallon tender capacity here. And I looked on the other side and I saw that he was filling with municipal water, and it's obviously been treated to some degree. It's potable. He was pumping it in at about 250 to 300 gallons a minute, which I thought was fantastic with an underground electric pump. So he was stopped only for 25 minutes or so to fill those 6,000 gallons. I thought that was a really cool service that was provided by the municipality. He paid $46 for that water, which I thought was a bargain. But I noticed, if you look at the picture, that he's carrying some interesting things on there. So he has a low drift adjuvant called Interlock on there, and he also has something called Crimson. Crimson is a Winfield United Ammonium Sulphate product. And I thought, okay, he's using municipal water and he's using ammonium sulfate, which we usually use to treat hard water. What is the story? And he basically felt that it was an insurance policy. He wanted to be certain that things were going to be okay. And certainly I've heard that before. There's also been a very strong push by Winfield United and others in the industry to make you, the spraying customers, more aware of the water quality. It will obviously lead to some AMS sales, but it is, I think, been a very good service to make us aware of it. And I hope to shed some light on what it all is. The first message really is to get a water test. I think we'd be, we don't know. If we don't test something, we can't talk about it. So if you phone me up and say, is my water good for spraying? I want to see a water test. There's almost nothing else that will answer that question. The only basic guideline I can give you without seeing a water test is to ask you if it's a surface or a well. If it's surface water, it is typically not hard. It will typically have low dissolved salts in it, but it may be turbid, which means suspended particles, and so on and so forth. I want to go through things one step at a time about what everything is that you might be dealing with in water. So the first one is indeed turbidity. Not usually a problem for well water. It is not usually tested for, and there's no guidelines for what's acceptable in terms of turbidity. The way to do it is really to shine light through it and look at the attenuation of that light by the glass or the water in the way. There are really no mixing or spraying consequences of having turbid water, but it has a negative effect on both glyphosate and Reglone. So those are the big ones. Both of those molecules are highly polar, and they will bind irreversibly to the cations presented in some organic matter such as soil. It is, as I said, not usually tested for, but it's something that you do visually. If you do have an issue, and I speak from personal experience, on our farm we had turbid water in our dugout because we farmed in the Red River Valley. After a rain, obviously, that would always be a little bit more cloudy. It was also nutrient enriched, so it did have some growth in it. And we ended up treating our pond with aluminum sulphate. That's a powder you can get. You basically put it into the pond water. It was required that you agitate the water with an outboard motor, a propeller of some sort, and get it stirred up real good and thorough. And 24 hours or so later, it's a coagulating agent, so the suspended solids will clump together and gravity will take them to the bottom. Okay, this is not a treatment that you can do in a sprayer tank. It is a treatment that has to be done in advance, and it requires a good 24 to 48 hours for the clarification to occur. So it's similar to, this product is used also, I'm not sure if it's used in the food industry, but cream of tartar is also a coagulating agent. It clarifies juices, fruit juices you might have pressed at home, that kind of a thing, and you just dispose of the suspended solids that have sunk to the bottom. One of the first things that we look at when we look at a water test is conductivity. So conductivity is one of the easiest things you can test for. In fact, you can buy a conductivity meter. It'll cost you $30 or $40. It is a little battery-powered probe. You turn it on, it's self-calibrating, and you dip it into a liquid. It will give you a reading, and usually if the reading is below 500, we say there isn't any problem. But there are situations where it's larger, and in fact, most situations it's larger than that. And then in that case, TDS or conductivity doesn't tell you anything. And the reason is that we just don't know what's in it. It could be calcium, magnesium, iron, hard metal cations, but it could also be sulfates, bicarbonates, things that actually the spray mix might be relatively indifferent to. So we do a level. Now conductivity and TDS are usually reported in the same printout, but they may not be. But they're related to each other, and the relationship varies. Usually conductivity is the higher number, and then if you multiply by about 0.6, it depends, it could be 0.55 to 0.65, it depends on the other properties of the water, you will get at the total dissolved solids part. One thing to watch for is conductivity should be reported in microsiemens per centimeter. Sometimes it's millisiemens per centimeter. So you might see a number that might be 0.8, and you think, well, that's not a problem. That's millisiemens. 800 is microsiemens multiplied by 1,000. That gets you the real number. So just pay attention to the numbers. They should be in the hundreds or low thousands is the typical numbers for conductivity and TDS. So that's an early indicator. It's a go, no-go for me. If TDS, as I said, is low, we just say spray with it. There's nothing that could be in there that should be a problem. pH is the next one we look at. pH is rarely a problem, and it's usually not something we'd actually have to correct. So most pHs on the Western Canadian prairies are going to be built between 6 and 8. And if they're even slightly outside of that range, I don't think it's a problem. And then the reason is that our products typically will dissolve well in that kind of a pH, and that the product that you add will probably alter the pH anyways. So most of our herbicides are weak acids. That means they will lower the pH somewhat. For example, if you have a water with a pH of 7.5, if you dump a liter per acre rate equivalent of glyphosate into that water, it will probably lower the pH by 2 to 3 points. So it'll be a pH of about 5 when you're done. So it's actually one of the stronger acids in the weak acid world. So it does have a strong acidifying effect of and by itself. There's really no need really to supplement that acidification. I will get back to acids a little bit later. So there are only two reasons to adjust pH and one reason to absolutely never adjust pH. The first reason to adjust pH is if the product that you're spraying can decay at a suboptimal pH. So typically when we leave the neutral range, it might be too alkaline or too acidic, and you can get what's called hydrolysis. That just basically means chemical breakdown. Now, this is a little bit oversold. We see some acidifiers say, your product won't last if you don't put acidifier into it. I'll show you a chart in just a couple of slides that will kind of hopefully illuminate that slightly. But we don't actually have an alkaline hydrolysis problem with our products that we use here on the prairies. The second issue is to improve solubility and ease of clean out. And now this one's important. And the reason that's important is because most of the products that we use on the prairies dissolve better at high pH. And they dissolve in some cases very poorly in an acidified solution. Okay? And if they should precipitate out because you've acidified the mixture, you will have a clean out issue. You will have a carryover issue, very, very likely. Okay? And in fact, the wrong pH can be absolutely catastrophic to your tank mix. And we'll talk about some examples. So here's a table I made. I looked up the pHs of the common, everything I could basically find. And Jim did some of the heavy lifting here. He got most of these. I highlighted a few that we might want to look at. Tribenuron is the first one that's expressed. That's a group 2. It's a sulfonyl urea. All sulfonyl ureas dissolve better at high pH. And this is a very good example because Express and Express Pro and Express SG had for many years been implicated in tank cleanout issues that would haunt you when you sprayed your Liberty canola. Look at the numbers here. pH 7 dissolves 2,000 parts per million. pH 5, 48. So the classic example that I'd like to share here is a story that was told me by a representative that worked for DuPont before the FMC merger. And what he said was, we were adding glyphosate to water. It lowered the pH. And then we added Express Pro, and we got a cloudy mixture. It was cloudy. So he said, well, something's not suspending or dissolving properly. Then we added ammonia, just basically a household ammonia that is a tank cleaner, until the pH came back up to 7-ish. And the solution went clear. And that indicated to them that now the Express Pro had properly dissolved. They then sprayed that material out and compared the efficacy of the glyphosate. The glyphosate performance was the same in both cases. So glyphosate was not negatively affected, and that is, I think, important. So the other two, below that, Simplicity and Frontline, are currently very widely used products. Simplicity, obviously a graminicide, Frontline, Prepass, we all know it. Very, very strong pH response. Look at Simplicity, 32,000 ppm in a neutral, and I think only, 16 ppm in pH 5. So back in the day, the scientists that did most of the work on water quality in our general area was John Nalawaya, Dr. John Nalawaya, professor of wheat science at North Dakota State University. He actually, after looking at all of these issues, he's a chemist, said, we're going to design our own adjuvant and we're going to make it a basic adjuvant. It's going to raise the pH, and he called it Basic Blend. And last week, I met with one of his colleagues. John is long retired, I think passed away actually. But Joe Eichley was in Saskatoon, and Joe Eichley replaced Richard Zollinger at North Dakota State. And he said it's still a product that is still popular and it still works. So it's a complete opposite to what we're hearing from the adjuvant industry, that we need to acidify, make glyphosate work better, everything works better. It's actually more dangerous to acidify than we think. Heat and Infinity are two surprises. Heat, an important product for burn-off and desiccation. Look at that solubility difference. And Infinity pyrosulfatol is another one that I thought I would just point out. Not as big an effect, but it's also there. So lots of reasons to not acidify because you may have tank mix issues if you do. Want to now look at this half-life story. So this is a table of, insecticides here. Some of them we know, some of them we don't. But in an alkaline environment, you might say, unstable, 48 minutes, 4 hours, 5 hours, right? Malthion, 5 hours, okay? So that's high pH, unstable. And if you're neutral, which is I think where most of us typically are with these products, the actual alkaline hydrolysis, the half-life of these is actually fairly high. So the worst one here, Imidan, 12 hours, not even used here. Otherwise 3 days, 24 days, 8 days. I don't really think that's justification for acidification in a single tank. If you're going to store it for a while afterwards, you might have some justification. But it looks like even these insecticides are for the most part stable. Just make sure they're not in an alkaline environment. If they are, then acidification may be necessary. There's another product. This is not a Manitoba product. This is an Eastern product, but I just wanted to point it out. And this one is chaperone. It's chlorimuron. And it says on the bottom that if you're outside the optimal pH range, if you're too alkaline or too acidic, you can have rapid breakdown of this product. So in both directions, suboptimal pH. So pH is something that I don't think I'm really super comfortable recommending you play with because you're dealing with chemistry and you might have really negative consequences. Here's saflufenicil. This is heat. In the East, it's called Aragon. In the States, it's called Sharpen. I've already shown some of this data, but 10 milligrams per liter at pH 4, 36, 34, 60 at pH 7.7, and then much, much more at higher pH. But they documented in this study by Ross Camp et al. That there was a loss of efficacy at the lower pH. So actually the solubility and efficacy were in fact related. So I think that's very important. All right, let's move on. Bicarbonates. Bicarbonates are basically it's alkalinity. It's a measure of the solution's ability to resist a pH change. It's complicated. They are often associated with hard water because there can be calcium or sodium bicarbonates, and those are antagonizing cations. So they're basically negative. They have a negative effect on all things, and in this case, a negative effect on mixing. So at greater than 500 ppm, they inhibit these products, 2,4-D, MCPA. Some of the DIMs are sensitive to bicarbonates, and you may cause high pH. And AMS and UAN and some acids can combat bicarbonates. So there are, I think, other consequences. We'll talk about water temperature in just a few minutes, but cold water plus bicarbonates has been implicated in getting some mixtures into solution. So that is a contributing factor. Hardness is the big one. This is the order in which I look at water tests. I look at hardness at the very end. I want to make sure that I'm clear with other things before we go there. Very strong negative efficacy effect, but it really primarily affects glyphosate and glufosinate. Now, neither product in Canada has ammonium sulphate on the label. The US Liberty product does have ammonium sulphate on its label, but not the Canadian formulation. 2,4-D amine and dicamba can also be affected by hard water. And I think to a lesser degree, we can open it up to probably broadly most of the weak acid herbicides, the group 1s, the group 2s are probably slightly affected by hard water. But the hardness level required to achieve inhibition is quite a bit higher than we would have for glyphosate. Glyphosate is the most sensitive to it, okay? So commonly this is treated with ammonium sulphate 210024 or as a melted liquid 8009. So that's a 30% solution. It is the go-to treatment for it. And the nice side effect that treating hardness with ammonium sulphate has is that the ammonium component, the sulphate does the tying up of hard water cations. It's the ammonium, though, that helps products get through the membrane. So it has a nice little side effect. I'll just show you a little picture of that in a few slides, so bear with me. Temperature, I remember a long time ago we did some studies at Ohio State where we atomized different adjuvants at different temperatures, and we did find a significant droplet size effect, but we also noticed that at cold temperatures, and I think that, it's really common sense, we have these issues with mixing, and we have these issues with also cleaning. So that's something. So there are longer mix times with cold water, and especially for the emulsifiable concentrates. So those are oily products. They may require a little bit of nudging along. They can become slightly oily, sticky, greasy films. And for example, in pulse width modulation solenoids, where the plunger or poppet moves back and forth at 10 or 15 or more hertz, it can be a cause for failure. And you'll notice that in some cases you simply have to clean the solenoids because you have a mix-up with there. The classic example here is cold water that's high in bicarbonates used to mix Liberty, Centurion, and Amigo. So that is the first time that we noticed that, and it often led to people having to basically stop spraying and take their solenoids apart and clean them and get them running again. A suitable way to get around that is obviously, other than changing the water supply, is to avoid using Amigo, and there are some workarounds, but I recommend that you speak to the BASF sales agent about that before you do that. And high bicarbs, as I said, can make this effect worse. There's some talk about using ammonium thiosulfate instead of ammonium sulfate. Ammonium thiosulfate has a slightly different chemistry, and this is some work done at Purdue University, and Johnson et al. Did this. And you can see here, this is untreated, this is wheat. Glyphosate plus AMS, better kill. And then glyphosate plus ammonium thiosulfate at the low rate, didn't work. High rate, didn't work either. Maybe there's some burning here. Glyphosate plus ammonium thio plus AMS, didn't really bring things back. So the ATS was actually quite antagonistic, and this is at the high rate ATS. So I think just simply, there's another example here. This one is a velvet leaf. It's one example of a broadleaf. A velvet leaf, very difficult to wet in some cases. Again, with the AMS alone and glyphosate, it worked the best. When you added ATS, it just ruined the control. So I know it's an easier liquid to use. Some of you may be preferring it just for ease of handling, but it is probably not as recommended as ammonium sulfate. All right, this is not intimidating at all, is it? This is an example of how not to make a table. But this is literally just a printout, a screenshot of a typical water test that you might get. And I just want to quickly go through it with you, because you might get these, and by all means, I'm easy to reach. Go to spurs101.com, go to the bottom and click on Tom. It sends me an email. Attach your PDF, and I'll get back to you and tell you what it actually means. But we'll go through this together right now. So here we are. So this is, someone sent me this, and I'll go through it in the order that I usually go through. So first of all, we're going to look at the pH. It's 7.92. I'm not worried about that at all. This one does have some guidelines here, which is very nice to see. I'm not sure who did this test. So we'll walk away from that. The next one, I'm going to look at TDS, total dissolved solids, 5660, and electrical conductivity, 10.2. So what are we seeing here? Warrants further investigation because it's over 500. It's way over 500, so there's something in there, but we don't know what it is. We have no idea. It's an electrolyte, okay? So let's go look at bicarbs. Bicarbonates, 247. The guideline here is 500. It's not printed here, but below 500, I am not worried. Okay, so we're good to go. Now let's look at calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, and iron. Those are the 5. Some people include aluminum here, but we typically don't have aluminum in water. But calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, and iron. Those are the ones that will harm your water. So calcium, 59 ppm, not too bad. Magnesium, 10, not too bad. Sodium, oh boy, that's the culprit. Potassium, not bad. Iron, typically very low. We have very few waters with high iron. But I highlighted chloride here. Not all tests have chloride, but we obviously know that sodium and chloride are both high. That's sodium chloride, it's salty. It's basically table salt is in this water. And if you were to taste this, maybe you would even notice that it's salty tasting, okay? So it's that salty. And the answer here is a little difficult. Ammonium sulfate will help with the sodium, but it's not a very strong antagonist. So what total hardness is now, this is what I'm going to do next. Total hardness is usually expressed as a calcium carbonate equivalent. It's usually in ppm. It's only 190. And that's because hardness is calculated only from calcium and magnesium. They ignore sodium, potassium, iron. And so both calcium and magnesium are low, therefore total hardness is low. I think it's worth knowing that you have sodium. It will not strongly antagonize, but I'm not super comfortable with spraying with such a salty product. So I would say, consider maybe drilling a different well or having a different kind of solution. But in a pinch, ammonium sulfate will take it where you want it. Here's another one. So let's go through this one. It's like, here are all these numbers with decimal places. pH, close to 8, we're good. TDS, 500, I think we're good. Conductivity, see, this is 1. This is 750, like 0.75 millisiemens, which would be 750 microsiemens. I have to pay attention. So we're on the edge, but I'm already not that worried, okay? Bicarbonate is also below 500. And then here are the hard water anions. So look at calcium, 83, magnesium, 58, potassium, 16, sodium, 19. I don't think I have an iron test here. Not here. Chloride, sodium, yeah. This is absolutely good water. The total hardness here is 446, and that's because we have magnesium and calcium in relatively high numbers, 83 and 58. Okay, it's just a mathematical formula that combines those ppms of those two plus some kind of a standard and multiplies them, and that's what you get. So am I worried about this? Yeah, this needs treatment. But ammonium sulfate will easily do this. Okay, you can test for hardness yourself. So there are hardness test kits. Most of them are chemical kits, but you can get hardness water strips, and they're the color-coded ones for like pH for your hot tub. The main issue with them is that in the hot tub environment, a 300 ppm hardness is hard. In the agricultural environment, that's not hard. We worry about 500, 600, 700, and the strips typically don't go that high, or they're hard to differentiate. So really the only real options that you have are to go to a water testing lab. Lastly, this is I was in Saddle Hills. This is up in the Peace River, North Peace, or near the North Peace, right by the Peace River. And they have municipal water, and I just wanted to show it to you. pH there, 7.6. Conductivity, 517. I'm already not worried, but we'll go through it. Alkalinity, 168, not worried. Calcium, 58, 19, 10.4, and less than 0.01. This is good water. This is municipal water. Okay. So a lot of my clients buy municipal water. They'll haul it. They'll store it on their farm. Okay. They'll have a large tank and do that. And that's a little more expensive, but if you live in the, I guess, St. Mary River Irrigation District in southern Alberta, it's not a huge cost. Okay. Hardness here, 228, absolutely okay. Now, let's go to something else. So, as part of Windfield's contribution to making us aware of hardness, what they've done is given us a calculator. And with their permission, I've reprinted this calculator and I've actually posted it on Sprayers 101. If you go to how to interpret a water quality test, it's a downloadable file, and it's the Windfield product with permission. So what they've done is John Naliwaya, who I've already mentioned, did some extensive research, and he calculated some coefficients here that gave us basically a ranking of the relative importance of these hardness cations. And I've put them here in the order of importance. Iron being the strongest, biggest coefficient. Magnesium is next most important. Calcium third most important. Sodium and potassium relatively minor. What John has done is then calculated an AMS requirement, and he's come up with this number here. And so if you have a hardness of 229, you basically recommend 0.86 pounds of 210024 dry product per 100 gallons of water. Okay, so that's an incredible contribution. I quite like this little calculator. One thing I wanted to point out, though, was this is the water test from the last sample in Saddle Hills. Okay, in my opinion, I would say just use it. But if you plug the numbers into this calculator, it says, hey, you should add something. And so what's that all about? So let's go into a different situation. I pretended that the actual iron contribution here is 20 parts per million. Very few waters have such high iron, but I've done the math here. Now it's 1.7. The hardness hasn't changed. So it is important to not just go for hardness, but look at what else might be in there. It is not part of the calculation. Okay. So in this case, you're using twice as much ammonium sulfate, and it's probably necessary to get rid of just the iron component. And I want to contrast this with the way we used to do it, and that is back in the day, all right, if you remember Les Henry, University of Saskatchewan, longtime contributor to Grain News, recently passed away, and Rick Holm, his colleague as a wheat scientist at the University of Saskatchewan, did a study where they looked at what level of hardness inhibits glyphosate and other products. They wrote an excellent fact sheet on it. It is available on the Saskatchewan Agriculture and Food website. It is dated, but I read all the fact sheets that come out on water quality. This is still the best one. It basically, Les and Rick just did a fantastic job of explaining what is hardness, what is the chemistry. If you want to do a deeper dive on this, that should be your first stop, okay? And what they said was, it's binary. We basically think if you have, if you have less than 350 and you're using the half liter per acre rate equivalent, or if it's less than 700 and you're using the full liter, and let's face it, most of us are using the full liter these days, they said, don't do anything. You're good. It's binary. It's like you can get away with some level of hardness without having to do anything. If you go with the Windfield United or the North Dakota State approach, what you've got is a situation where every water sample is going to take some AMS, right? Even low levels of hardness will call for some amount of AMS, so you should always be adding AMS. And I'm a little bit unsure how to respond to that. I still have taken the binary approach. I think we should keep it as simple as we possibly can in farming, and shouldn't complicate things with adjuvants if we don't have to. So I think, that's basically the guideline of it. I want to show you, in closing now, how this whole thing works, okay? So let's see we have water. Let's say that we have these hard water cations. I've already identified them. And this is glyphosate over here, okay? Let's bring glyphosate into this picture. What will happen is the hard water cations will just attach themselves to the glyphosate because they're cations, they're positive. The weak acid constituents on glyphosate, there's 3 of them, are negatively charged at most pHs, not all, but at the intermediate pHs they are negatively charged, and they will gladly bind to these hard water cations. And what happens to glyphosate? It no longer fits into the binding site, the ESPS synthase enzyme. It's got a different shape, different size. It's a lock and key situation. The key no longer fits the lock. Therefore, glyphosate does not work. Okay? So let's now take glyphosate back out. Let's add sulfate. Sulfate loves to form insoluble salts, with magnesium and calcium particularly, but also with some others. And so these salts basically are no longer able to bind to glyphosate because they're strongly held and they're insoluble. And when you bring glyphosate back into it, they basically fall out and they're not there. Glyphosate can now go ahead and do its work. Some people have suggested that we need to add the sulfate before the glyphosate. John Naliwaya, want to refer back to his contribution, did both and said it actually doesn't matter. The sulfate binds so strongly to the hard water cations that it will, we're only guessing, I guess, we'll actually take them off the glyphosate. But his conclusions were the mixing order doesn't matter. I would still probably add ammonium sulfate first because it just makes sense that you would clean up your water before you add something that's sensitive to it. I promised that I would talk to you briefly about this concept of improved absorption by ammonium, or because of ammonium, by the membrane. And this is called ion trapping. Anyone who took undergraduate weed science at the University of Manitoba like I did, we covered this in class. This is not news. This is well established. Well, here's what happens. If you have a living cell, the outside of the cell is usually acidic. And the reason it's acidic is that there's a proton pump that constantly always pumps protons from the cytosol inside the cell to the outside, and that lowers the pH. Okay? And what that does is, at low pH, any weak acid herbicide actually becomes a little bit more oily, because at low pH, those negative sites I identified, those 3 negative sites on glyphosate, they get a hydrogen at low pH. And then all of a sudden, they're no longer negative. Now they're neutral. So all of a sudden, the glyphosate becomes a little bit more oil soluble. That's the premise also for acidifying glyphosate. And then what happens is the product goes inside, and because there is a high and alkaline environment, it gets deprotonated. Now it's water soluble again. Okay. So now those hydrogens fall off, high pH, and the chemical can't leave because it has to go through an oily barrier, and it's water soluble. Ammonium, oh, that's cool. Ammonium facilitates the proton pump. Ammonium helps the negative, helps the product get across and helps maintain that pH barrier. So it's ion trapping. Okay, you can make it across. If you're in a low pH environment, you never get back out. And that's one of the reasons why Pursuit, a product we don't use anymore, with UAN, urea ammonium nitrate, ammonium, has ammonium in it, helps the uptake of products as well as non-ionic surfactants and crop oil concentrates. So quite a strong effect, and this is true for some other products. And of course, if you put them together, you're good. The U.S. label for ammonium for Pursuit does say to add, 28%, 32%, or even 1034. That 1034, the nitrogen is also ammonium. Okay. So let's review. So ammonium is in both AMS and UAN, helps uptake. Sulfate is only in AMS, helps tie up hard water cations. Do not use, you may get a benefit from using UAN in your water. It helps with bicarbonates. But you may get a benefit of a slight increase in performance with hard water, but it's not because of the hard water cations. It's because of the uptake across the membrane. Okay. A couple of words on acids before we finish off. I already mentioned that lower pH makes weak acids less ionic, less water soluble, so they're more likely to go through the cuticle, more likely to go through the membrane if they stay that way, if the low acid or the low pH environment is retained. So there's also a less opportunity for the cations to bind, okay? And it does not help absorption, but my main concern, I already beat this one to death, is earlier we do have these issues with solubility. So I don't typically recommend using a pH reducer for hard water antagonism. Just as a review, here are the group 2s. Sulfonylureas made by FMC, high pH is better for solubility. IMIs made by BSF, low pH is better, but they're actually neutral. Neutral is fine. Corteva makes fluoroazolam and peroxalam, Frontline and Simplicity, high pH is better. And then we have Everest and Varro, by Bayer and UPL, high pH is better. So usually for group 2s, high pH is better. Okay. My top advice for you is this: get a test. If you're not sure what to do with it, send it to me, I'll tell you. But there's a number of other experts out there that you can reach out to that will tell you. AMS is the simplest and most cost-effective water conditioner for hardness. In fact, even if you buy jugs of water conditioner from a third party, it will likely have AMS in it. The AMS will likely be doing at least some, if not most, of the lifting on that conditioner. Do not adjust pH unless required by label. avoid ATS in the tank mix. So that's it for me today. Laurie, I want to thank you very much. We have time for questions, is that right? So if there are any questions, I just want to remind you as you think of your question, I want to acknowledge the support of the Manitoba Crop Alliance and Manitoba canola growers for sponsoring sprayers101.com. This is a website that Jason DeVoe on the right and I write for, and we want to get information to you, and it is non-commercial information, so it's only sponsored by your very own dollars. So thank you for supporting us. You can reach us on Twitter or through the website, and we try to provide material that I think will be helpful. Any questions? Yes, there's a question there.
Municipal water for our sprayer. So what time of year would be best to do a test on it?
What time of year would be best to do a test on municipal water? If it's municipal, I'm not that worried about it, to be honest with you. I think if you bought it from the municipality, I think that they will have reasonably good water all year round. I don't know of time-sensitive intervals where it might go up and down. Most aquifers, if they're drawing from an aquifer or it's a river-fed system, I'm really not worried about it, to be honest. Later in the season, you might have some issues come off fields, but they're not going to be critical, not like groundwater. I think you're just simply probably good. Yeah.
Any more questions?
There's a question here.
Yeah, how frequently, you said test every few years, but how frequently would you test groundwater, and that would different in like a pond versus a well frequency?
Yeah, so I said test every few years. What would be a difference in frequency between testing groundwater and well water? I guess we've had some dry summers, right? And I was concerned a few years ago when we went into a spring with significantly reduced river and well reservoirs. And I just felt that such a change in level warranted a testing. And I think probably for both. I don't know what these tests cost, to be quite honest, but can someone help me? A few hundred maybe? Is that about right? A turnaround to a week or so, I'm not sure, but it's not a super hard or expensive thing to do, and I think it's just worth knowing where you are and if that's changing with time. If you do it a few times, you get pretty confident that it's whether it's changing or steady. Yeah. Thanks for the question. What was that question?
50-50 tickets, anyone?
50-50 tickets. How are we doing for time? I think I'm done. Yeah, are we good? Okay. Well, I want to thank you. If there's no more questions, I'll be here. I'll be moving to the upstage for the next speaker, and you can always catch me there. Thank you very much.